Okay, thanks very much, Ankad, and it's great to be here. Thank you all for coming along. Thank you to Zoe. I am actually going to concentrate on Rwanda. Normally, if I do a Women in War slideshow, it covers about 20 countries, 30 countries, and is very fragmented, but I'm trying to be deeper. I'm trying to be more organised and focused. I won't be, it'll be a stream of consciousness because it always is, but anyway. One of the reasons I wanted to go back was to find people I'd photographed before, and I actually found 20, which is quite a convenient number since it's 20 years since the genocide. And so I'm going to show you the series of portraits I've made then and now and talk about some of the stories behind the portraits. I've just started with some pictures from the Save the Children archive, which was basically a trunk of Polaroid pictures which had been damaged by water, with bits of form stuck to them. And these were the pictures that were used to reunify children with family members, children who became separated, either within Rwanda or in Congo, or Zaire as it was then, Tanzania or Burundi. And I love this picture, photo abime, that means damaged, so damaged that there's nothing there. And as a conceptual piece, I think it's really interesting, but it's also very lifeless for me, and I found that I like the aesthetic experience of looking at these damaged Polaroids. But then I felt rather uncomfortable about it because they were all people's lives, and I wanted to know what had happened to these people. As it is, their photos are mouldering away in a trunk. Up to 1 million people killed was the most horrendous experience I've ever had. And there's an amazing book by Philip Gorovich where he talks about going to the place that the next photo is from, which is Nirabui, which is one of the massacre sites, and about how his response was to take photos, seeing skeletons in the surroundings of the church. I went round several of these sites in 94, 95, and I think the Rwandan government has done an amazing job of preserving in different ways the memorial sites. So at some there are mummified bodies at Murambi. In others there are skeletons, and in others there's just a rather dignified memorial. But moving on from that, in 1994 to 97, I did quite a lot of work with Africa Rights, a human rights organisation, and their mission was to document, collect the testimonies from survivors of the genocide all over the country. And it was an amazing privilege to work for them because I got to listen to a lot of people's stories, and the pictures I took were used in reports. This is Anastasi in 1995, and she was macheted, and you clearly see how badly sewn up her scar was. And this is her with two children who were her relatives who she adopted. One of them's Claudine, and this was her 2 weeks ago, again with Claudine, who's now making baskets to sell. And for me, it was such a fantastic experience turning up with pictures I took 18, 19 years ago and saying, here's your photo. And nobody said, why did it take you so long? And we just had amazing warmth, and everyone said, thank you for remembering us, which I thought was so generous. And everyone has terrible stories that go with the pictures. Anne-Marie was brutally raped as her family were killed. Her attacker was caught and died in prison of an AIDS-related illness. She's now HIV positive, but taking antiretrovirals and supports herself selling food in the market. Amazing woman. Everyone was amazing. They've survived and they're proud to be Rwandan. They're proud of the changes that have occurred in their country. I met Antoinette in '95. 10 of her children were killed. Her only remaining child was Emmanuel, who's with her here. He's now away at boarding school. And when I met up with her again, she was really depressed and very quiet and withdrawn. And she was just wearing this blue t-shirt. And then I said, haven't you got an African cloth that people wrap around themselves like this, which she went and got. And then as we took photos, she just really lightened up, and it became like a phototherapy session without, any direction. It was just being able to relax with someone, being given a bit of attention, being visited. And, women in their 60s, 70s in Britain are lonely, I think, once you've lost your job, your work, and in the case of Rwanda, if you've lost your family. For secondary school in Rwanda, children go away to boarding school. Everyone goes to boarding schools in a different town to where their parents are. And for a lot of widows, for people who've only got 1 or 2 surviving children, it's quite traumatic because it deepens that sense of isolation. Anyway, I just love the fact that Antoinette found the energy to break into a smile. On to Azel. As neighbours killed Azel's 3 children in front of her, along with her husband, she was left for dead. Her neighbour lost his wife and children. The 2 married and now have 3 children together, but don't forget their first families. And there's an amazing quote from Azel. The pain that I have in my head gets worse when I remember the death of my children and their father. I have remarried, but the anguish remains. I'm like a tree that has neither roots nor branches. And this is Azel today. And she was totally into recreating her pose. This is her 3 children who were at school. And this is her with her husband. And she was rather reticent about being photographed with her. And I'd forgotten about the story of her marrying the neighbour until afterwards. So I didn't make a big thing about it. Beran Seal put her hands up to protect herself from machete blows. So she lost her fingers. She ended up in hospital, but the nurses refused to treat her. This is at the time when the Hutu nurses refused to treat people who were Tutsi. After the genocide, she found her 2 children and those of her dead brother, who she then brought up. So this is Beran Seal with Emmanuel in '95. And this is Emmanuel busy with his phone. Same as youth all over the world. This is her adopted daughter, who was her niece. So this is Emmanuel doing Beran Seal's hair before she has her picture taken. This is Catherine at a place called Bisesero, which was a massacre site where people fought back. It's one of the few places where the sort of warriors, the local farmers, armed themselves with stones and spears and fought back. And when I first met Catherine, there was a field where there were piles of skulls and bones, and the survivors had collected together the remains of their families, and now they've built a big monument. So this is Catherine, aged, I was told she was 75. This is also her, age 75. And this is Catherine today. So she's over 90 and just fantastic. Her grandsons taken her to Kigali so he can look after her. She's actually living with another family, Madeline, who's also from Bisesero. Console was again hacked and raped, but I met her when she was 23. She was very depressed. She felt that she'd never get married. She was living with her mother. She had just one thumb left. And I found her, and it was so fantastic. She'd gone to Switzerland. She was sent to Switzerland by a charity, and they cut her stump and made it into a claw so that she could pick things up. When we found her house, after a lot of asking around, found the house, there was no one there, then a small child appeared, and they said Console had gone off to find firewood. And then this man came running up, and it was her husband, Paul. And it was about 20 minutes before Console got back from the woods with a whole lot of kids who were carrying the firewood for her. And in the meantime, we chatted to Paul, and he said he'd married Console, even though she was older than him. And everyone objected. And I said, did your family object? He said, the whole of Africa objected to me marrying Console. And it was just fantastic to hear this from a man talking of his love for this woman. He said, she's fantastic. It wasn't her fault that she was chopped. She's still a woman. We've had 3 children together. Their eldest child was away at boarding school. Again, at boarding school, because she's 16. And he was just really, really lovely. And the little girl was fantastic as well. And it was, for me, this project didn't become about the photos. It became just about seeing these people and feeling, you know, if you can survive a genocide and you get on with your life and you make the most of it, you know, it's such a lesson to everyone. A lot of women got a lot of support from Avega, which was the widows' organisation, which was set up by a couple of women in '94. One of them, Esther, was a really good friend, and she actually lives in exile in Germany now. And there are a lot of sort of middle-class women I've known personally who've left the country, who couldn't cope with being there. Another friend, Monica, lives in Kenya, and her 5 children were killed because she sent them to her mother, thinking they would be safe, and they weren't. And she's since had more children. My friend Lindsay Hilson asked Monica if the children spoke Kinyarwanda. They live in Kenya. And Monica said, no, that's the language of killers. And she can't bear to talk to her children in her own language. They're being brought up in English. Anyway, another of the founders was Darcille. And when I took this picture, she was caring for 15 children, some of whom are here, 3 of her own, and her relatives' children, orphans, who she adopted. And she also had a job as a civil servant, had civil servant wages, which in Rwanda are not a lot, and yet somehow has managed to bring up all these children, send them to school. They've either graduated, a couple are married and have children, so she's now a grandmother, and just getting on with it, doing it. She said, oh, well, the older ones looked after the younger ones. So now Darcille has retired, and she's the treasurer for Avega, which has been a really important organisation. Daphrose I first met when she was 17. She's also from Bisesero, the massacre site where people resisted. And now she's 35, I think. And there's been a very big cow distribution program in Rwanda. These cows tend to be kept in dark sheds mostly, and They get taken out for outings, but they're the pride of families. Daphros has also got married, and she has a son, Pacifique. We'll meet her partner, Philemon, in a while. Pacifique is her only child, and she's tried to have more children, hasn't been able to. She doesn't want to see a doctor because she's afraid that she'll be told that she can't have any more. But it's become a real block for her. And Rwandan families have always been big. People have a lot of children because that's your insurance for the future, that they'll look after you. And there's a great pride in having lots of children, but Daphros feels that she hasn't done that. Okay, Devota, when she was attacked, her teeth were knocked out. She was knocked unconscious. And when I first met her, she was 14 years old, and I felt so sorry for this young girl who had no teeth. And her parents were killed, and all of her siblings. But at a project, a cooperative for young survivors, she met Eric, and now they have Odore, and she's got new teeth. This is Eric on the phone. Eric was a very busy man. He was fantastic, a young entrepreneur. And when I said I wanted to take her picture, Devota, I think, was afraid I'd make her open her mouth again. I said, no. And she grabbed her baby and said, with the baby. So Devota gets to be pictured with Odore. Epiphany was a Hutu and married a Tutsi. So her family killed her husband and handed over her daughter, who was about to be married, to the Interahamwe, to the killers. And she's particularly lonely and isolated because the people who killed the family have been in prison. They're now out and they're back living in the community. And it's a small village, and Epiphany passes them and can't bear to greet them. They greet her. She says nothing and lives with her grief. And one of her daughters is HIV positive, and also her granddaughter. So these were the local kids who came to see what was going on. Okay, this is a dark bit, I'm afraid. Isanth was pregnant when she was attacked, and she was thrown into a burial pit. Her leg was hurt. Then she survived. She had her son, who she called Fils, which just means son. That's his name. Apparently, he's now at a very prestigious boarding school. But Isanth has just been totally traumatized, and she was living on the street. If people gave her food, men would attack her for it. She was raped again. She's now HIV positive. But some charitable, well, they aren't sisters, but they're religious women, care for her very kindly, and she's now in a sort of home where she does domestic work. She does the dishes. She's being cared for. She won't have anything to do with her son, who I think she feels that because she was raped, the son was from the rape, but if you add up the timings, he's not. Her son had actually sent her this bit of material, and so when I said I wanted to take her picture, she went and got it without any prompting and put it on as her skirt. So there is a connection there, but deeply, deeply traumatized. Christine, her husband was killed. She was left with 3 young children. Then she says, I ended up in a toilet where the killers threw me after having hit me with machetes and masseus on the chest and the head. And she was very worried about where they were going to live when I first met her. But now she has a house, she has a business, she has a cow, and I haven't put in the photograph of her with her baby daughter, who she said is now massive, and I can believe it because Christine she said, I've lost so much weight. Like all women of a certain age, she's on a diet. She said, oh, you must come back again, I'll have lost even more weight. But I didn't meet the chubby daughter because she was at school. Matoshi, that's right, whose real name is Marcel. Matoshi means big eyes, and this is him in Bisacero as well, in 95. And he, as a 9-year-old, threw stones as they were being attacked, threw stones at the Interahamwe. And he's now joined the Rwandan army. He's a soldier. He just served in South Sudan. Rwanda actually makes a very big contribution to the African peacekeeping force. And I asked him why he joined the army, and he said, so if there's another genocide, I'll be better prepared. I'll be able to fight back. And although it's International Women's Day, for me, men are important, that we need men in the world, and their contribution has been amazing. Maurice lost his wife and children. He was his child. He only had 1 child. He was badly injured and couldn't defend them. He was hiding. Everyone was hiding in bushes, and he saw them killed in the most horrible way. And Maurice has since remarried and has new children, but says, I'll never forget my wife and my child. And he rang about 3 or 4 times after I did the picture of him. And I had to do this very quickly on his way home from work, and it was getting dark. And we just went to a cafe in the garden. But he kept ringing and saying, I'm so glad to meet you. I'm so glad you listened to me. I'm so glad to have talked to you. And it was obviously really important for him to have a connection with his past, which he couldn't, with his present family, but to just recognise them. This is the saddest picture of all, because Pakasi, who when I photographed her, I think was about 10, she got pregnant and couldn't bear to tell her aunt and killed herself. I think that was so tragic that she'd survived the genocide and couldn't survive being pregnant as a single girl in a traditional society. Okay, this is Philemon, who married Daphros, who had the cow as a young man, and now as a father, and the cow. Obviously, the most important possession. There's absolutely nothing in the house. The room is completely bare, but the cow has her own house out the back. Samuel, again from Bisacero, lost his wife and children, but now has a whole lot more. He has, another 6 children, 3 with his present wife, 3 with a neighbour. And this is, nearly the last, Simeon, who was one of the leaders at Bisacero. And he's since remarried and has 5 new children. So he's sort of moved on in some ways. He's 71 now. He's very bossy with his children, but I think they know how to get round him. They seem to be holding their own. Specios was macheted when she was pregnant, but her child is again away at school. A lot of 19, 20-year-olds are still at school as well, because people missed out a lot on years of education, so they're slightly older. But Specio's now has a house, has a cow, of course, but she's still got her scar. And it's the physical scars and the mental scars that obviously don't go away. And this is the last one. This is Stanislas. And Stanislas is the guilt of the survivor, really. He'd moved to Congo, to Zaire, before the genocide. He was building a new home there for his family. They were all killed in Rwanda. And he just talks about how bad he feels, how he should never have gone, how he wasn't there for them, he couldn't defend them. And this is me and Baron Seal, just to show what an amazing experience this was, doing these pictures and being privileged not to meet people once, but to meet them again and to go back into their lives. So that's the picture bit. Thank you.